About genetics. This is the genetics intro. A lot of this you've gotten in 7th grade already. When you were 7th grade, way back when, you went over most of what's in this lesson. So this is going to be mostly a recap from 7th grade and some application of things that we've talked about. But all right, so here's a little person that we're going to zoom in. If you were to zoom in on this person's in its DNA, you would see cells, and you see, I think I drew 23 pairs of chromosomes, and on each one of those chromosomes there are genes. So these are a pair. There's the same gene on each side. They may be coded differently. So one may be for blue eyes or brown eyes. One may be for lactose intolerance, and one of them is lactose tolerance. Or second toe is bigger than their first toe, or widow's peak, or dimples, or hitchhiker's thumb, or all the different. There's all kinds of different things that could be a gene for, but we're just going to say that it's hair color. So on that little section right there, on both of them, there's a gene for hair color. And if you were to zoom in on that, you would see the whole DNA strand is that, not all of the DNA of the chromosome, but a strand of DNA with maybe thousands or hundreds of base pairs together that makes up that DNA, that gene. Well, DNA, we've already talked about with the central dogma that DNA is turned into RNA, and that could be mRNA, that could be tRNA, that's rRNA, but the mRNA gets that code from the DNA, and then with the help of that trio works together and makes protein. So we've got transcription happening, and then translation happening, and then that protein is further worked on in the cell, and eventually it works its way into an expression of that gene, which would be red hair. So this person's red hair is determined by the protein that is made, which is determined by the RNA that is copied from that section of DNA, which is found in a chromosome, which is found in the nucleus of a cell, which is found in this living cell it's in every living cell in your body, just about. So let's go ahead and do some vocab. This is a very vocab heavy unit. Now again, you should have had most of this previously, but if you forgot or if you haven't had it, this will kind of catch you up. So an allele is, there are different versions of the genes. And so I said right here in this section, these are alleles. They're represented with letters. So we don't memorize the A's and T's and G's and C's that make this up. We just say that this gene is a capital letter or a lowercase letter. It's represented by a letter. The letter does not matter. It could be an A, it could be a B, it could be a Z or Y. I would recommend when you're doing these to use letters that are very clearly different between capital and lowercase. So C, Z, U, O, X. I would not do those. I would do A, B, D, E, F, G. Most of the letters. Just make sure that there's a big difference between the capital and the lowercase, or else it could get confusing. So lowercase is always going to be recessive. Uppercase is always going to be dominant. And we'll talk about more complex things than just recessive and dominant like we're going to talk about today. But in general, there's going to be a mixture of a capital. It's going to be capital lowercase, or there's going to be a lowercase. If the gene that is there is a recessive gene, the only way it'll show itself in the protein that's being made and in that trait, the only way that it'll show it in that trait is going to be if it's all by itself. If there's a dominant gene there, that dominant gene is very vocal and very obvious, it is going to show out. So if there's a dominant and a recessive gene, this recessive gene is going to be hidden. The only way the recessive gene shows is if it's all by itself. So in this case, we have a dominant gene on allele 1 and a recessive gene on allele 2, and you can tell that it's capital and lowercase. That's how I know it's dominant and recessive. A, the big A, is going to be dominant over the little a. So whatever this big A is coding for, blue eyes or brown hair or whatever it is, that is going to be the dominant trait. And so if you see somebody, well, that's getting ahead of us. Let's go down here. Genotype. Genotype and phenotype. So you need to know the difference between the genotype of something and the phenotype of something. So the genotype, that root word there is gene. This is literally the genetic makeup of this of this allele. So we show that with big A, or we show two capitals, a capital and lowercase, or two lowercase. And if we're using these, we can say big A, or little a, or big A, little a. Another way we can say this is homozygous. So these two would be homozygous. Homo means same. And so these two are the same. They're both capital, or these two are both lowercase. So they're homozygous. This one would be homozygous dominant. This one would be homozygous recessive. So homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive, also known as, AKA, it's also known as purebred. And so this is a purebred. It's all capitals or it's all lowercase. It's all the same, homozygous. This middle one is heterozygous, and we don't say heterozygous dominant or heterozygous recessive because there's one of each. Hetero means other, and so that tells us they're there with opposites. So we have a capital and a lowercase. That means that there's two different alleles. That's what we dealt with up here. It's a capital and a lowercase. Another name for this is hybrid. If you think about a hybrid car, a hybrid vehicle is a vehicle that does not run on one form of energy. The means by which it's propelled forward is either gasoline or it could be electric, and it could be a mixture. That's a hybrid. So like a Tesla is not a hybrid, it is an electric vehicle. A pickup truck from 40 years ago is not going to be a hybrid. It's going to be a purebred gasoline or diesel. A hybrid is going to be a mixture of the two. So in this case, it's going to be a capital letter and a lowercase letter. So that's all genotype stuff. When we're describing the genes that make up these chromosomes or a specific allele, then we're going to, that's talking about the genotype. The phenotype is the physical trait, the appearance sometimes. So pheno, the physical, the pH there is also in physical. So that's how I remember it, just pH. Phenotype is the physical trait. So oftentimes you'll see this, maybe your widow's peak, the way your hair grows in the upper forehead, or whether your earlobes are attached, or whether you have the ability to roll your tongue or not. Those would be the phenotype. They are determined by the genotype. Sometimes we can't see these things, but they're still there. So maybe lactose intolerance would be an example of a phenotype, but you can't just look at somebody and say, yeah, you look like a person who can't digest milk, or yeah, you could definitely digest some milk. We can't tell that by looking at them. So it is a physical trait. It's the thing that manifests based on what the genotype is. So a lot of times you'll see things like brown hair or blue eyes or widow's peak, or down here round and wrinkled. So down here this would be the genotype, and then this would be the phenotype. So let's go ahead and get down to here. This is called a monohybrid punnett square. So this square here is called a punnett square. It is a monohybrid because it is dealing with one trait. It's dealing with one trait. And the whole purpose of a punnett square, don't forget this, the whole purpose of a punnett square is to be able to predict what is going on, or what the chances are of an organism being or having offspring with a certain trait. So in this case, we're looking at male and female. Females have XX chromosomes. Males have XY chromosomes. So if we were to say a male and a female had a baby, there's a 50% chance that it's going to be female and 50% chance that it's male. So you may ask, how in the world did I fill that out? So similar to multiplication tables, if I'm looking at this column, everything in this column is going to have one, whatever is here. And everything in this row is going to have whatever is here. So if I'm talking about this square, I'm going to look up to this X, that's a capital X, and over to this X, and it's going to bring them both into here. It's going to be a capital X, capital X. Same thing here. Bring this one down, bring this one across, capital X, capital X. Then we got Y and X, bringing them here and here. And we'll talk about this more when we talk about other types of laws and genetics, but hopefully this makes sense. This is why when you have a child, it's a 50-50 chance that you'll get a female, and therefore 50-50 chance that you'll get a male, and that's how that works. Another way that you'll see it more often when we're talking about monohybrid punnett squares is, like I said, with the dominant and, or uppercase and lowercase letters. So this, if round is dominant to wrinkled, and this, the father that donated this DNA was heterozygous, which means capital and lowercase, and lowercase and lowercase. And it doesn't matter what letter you'll notice that I just used a random letter, but this is going to be capital D, lowercase d, little lowercase d, lowercase d. I'll start using some different words. This is heterozygous because it's a mixture, and this is homozygous recessive. So if we look over here, how many of them are homozygous dominant? There are 0 of them. None of the 4 are. So there is a 0% chance that the offspring will have homozygous dominant genes. What about heterozygous? Heterozygous, if I count them, I would count this one, and I would count this one. That's going to be heterozygous. That's 50% chance. And what about homozygous recessive? Homozygous recessive is the little lowercase d, and that's going to be 50% as well. And so those are genotypes. I'm finding percentages of genotypes, and that doesn't mean, again, what will happen. That means what is the probability, what is likely to happen. And so if we were to mate a heterozygous male with a homozygous recessive female, we would get this Punnett square, and we would find out that somewhere around half of them should be round, and about half of them should be wrinkled. Probability is 50-50 that it'll be round or wrinkled.